Working. There it goes. Ahoy, hoy, everyone. Yes, finally we're doing the May live stream after a failed attempt on Wednesday where we were plagued by technical stuff, but that's how it goes. So who's joining me so far? We have Chris.
Yep, I'm finally able to join.
Fourth Root just came in. I don't know if his mic is up or not. Okay, he just waved. And Nicholas, have you gotten your mic yet?
Yep, I got it right here.
Cool. It's good to talk to everyone. How's everyone doing?
I'm doing all right.
Nicholas, I thought the Bolsheviks killed you and your family back in Siberia.
No, I'm still alive.
Tsar Nicholas II, yeah.
Yep.
Without trial, mind you.
I like the version of that where Tom Baker played Rasputin. That was good. All right, it is May 20th, so if anyone cares about this, this is, I believe, the 244th anniversary of something called the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. That's a local thing for me. Any of you ever heard of that?
No, I haven't.
Supposedly, well, we know that the elders of Mecklenburg County got together on May 20th, 1775, and did something. We don't know exactly what it was because records were destroyed in a fire, but the rumor years later was that they had written a Declaration of Independence like over a year before Thomas Jefferson did.
Oh.
Now, what's interesting about that is that on May 31st, according to a South Carolina newspaper, and they published the full text of this, they passed what's called the Mecklenburg Resolves, where they basically said that all of the any law that was passed by the royal governor or any servant of the crown was invalid, and anyone trying to enforce the law should be arrested and all this stuff. So one of the big mysteries in North Carolina history is, first of all, what was the Mecklenburg Declaration? And then why would they turn around and pass the Mecklenburg Resolves? I'll tell you my opinion, and I think this is fairly obvious, because you had that changeover between the Julian and the Gregorian calendar, but not everyone changed at the same time. And May 20th on the Julian calendar is May 31st on the Gregorian calendar. I think they're the same document and they were just using two calendars.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah, because it was 11 days off. Because officially, I forget exactly when it was switched up, but I mean, not everyone switched over at the same time, so that makes it fun. We've already got Cinema in the chat. Actually, I should turn on all chat instead of just the top chat to make sure I don't miss anyone. Yes, you can join the chat, and if you want to force me to read out what you wrote, just click that funky shaped $sign down there and make it a super chat. But this isn't a super chat, but I'll read it out anyway. What do you think of Aquinas' First Way, especially the version by Edward Phaser, Sound Reasoning? I'm not familiar with that. Are any of you?
Nope. Aquinas. Aquinas. That sounds more like a brand of an overpriced bottled water than a.
Well, no, he's talking about Thomas Aquinas, the thinker, but I'm not sure what he means by the First Way.
Oh.
I'm not all that well versed on Aquinas. I kind of know some of the basics, but.
Yeah, First Way, it's better than the Third Way.
What's the Third Way?
Basically, the Third Way was, basically, it was what the corporatists invented in the 1930s. Basically, it was going to be like, it's also known as the Big Tent, you know.
Yeah, I think I've read his proofs of God. Didn't he have the ontological proof, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah. Which is basically God exists, therefore God exists. It's completely circular.
Oh yeah, it's like, how do you know God exists? Well, because it says so in the Bible. Well, how do you know the Bible's correct? Oh, because it's the Word of God.
Yep. Yeah, Devin Rojas asked if I'm a filmmaker, and yes, I am. Those two posters you see behind me are short films that I made. I'm not claiming to be Spielberg or anything, but I made a couple of short films, and it's been fun, and it's been a big learning experience. So I'd love to get the budget together to make a feature at some point. But the nice thing about short films is you don't need a budget. Actors will volunteer to do it for free to pad out, their resumes and just stay busy. And you can just experiment and try things. And, if you fail miserably, oh well, but you learn something.
Actually, Shane, that kind of reminds me of this really dark humor joke I saw one time, where a woman is talking to a male friend of hers, and she's like, I'm glad Harvey Weinstein's finally in jail. That guy forced me to do oral sex on him to get a job. And I'm like, wow, all you had to do was suck Harvey Weinstein's cock? I had to star in a bunch of crappy exploitation Asian horror films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, he's saying the argument from the prime mover, but where does the prime mover come from? That's the problem. But that's, yeah, I mean, this is what Carl Sagan said in Cosmos. If you said, okay, well, where did the universe come from? Well, God created it. Well, where did God come from? Oh, well, God just existed. He doesn't need to be created. Well, then why not save a step and say the universe doesn't need to be created?
Yeah, religious people don't want to feel reason. I think, as James Brandy said, religious people are unsinkable ducks. They don't just want their beliefs to be true, they need it to be true.
Well, and they're also starting from the conclusion, and they're looking for things to support. I mean, we see that in all sorts of places too, other than religion. It's kind of human nature. You have to train yourself not to do that.
And I think that's another reason why people get so defensive when you show them proof, is because, I don't know what it's called, but basically humans, deep down, we have this very selfish desire to not be wrong. So, that's why Carl Sagan's dragon and belief in belief exists. It's because deep down inside, a lot of religious and statists know their thing doesn't work, but they've been following it for so long that they mentally can't handle the idea that, I spent all my life believing in something that's bogus.
Material things need to cause immaterial things up. But if God can have an effect on the universe, then isn't he a material thing? By definition, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, because apparently, God made humans out of clay and everything. Okay, so God can move matter. If you can move matter, then by definition, you're energy.
Speaking of God and clay, I think the perfect example of belief in where people say, you shall not question your Lord God, is, you've heard of the Claymaker's tale, right, Shane?
Now, which one is that?
I don't know the exact verse, but it's a story in Romans, and basically God creates these two brothers, and this one brother goes on successfully while the other, is a sinner. He can't stop sinning, he's getting into trouble and all that. He finally pleads to God and asks, why am I constantly sinning? Why am I so imperfect? And God says, well, I made you that way. And he basically says, well, why'd you make me that way? And he basically responds, because you're a piece of clay. I'm the clay maker. You have no right to question me.
Can I get a quick mic check here? Am I coming through all right?
I am hearing you 5x5.
Yep, I'm hearing you.
And how do you know materialism is true? Boy, is that a loaded question. What would something non-material look like? If it looked like something, wouldn't it be? See, I have the same problem with the concept of supernatural. If something supernatural existed and we discovered it, all we would do is expand our concept of nature to cover it. Yeah. I mean, used to be, they thought that, okay, nature was matter. And if you showed them like, walkie-talkies or some kind of, something that used radio beams, then they'd probably, execute you for being a witch, because they would only be able to conceive of that in supernatural terms. That would be supernatural to them. And yet we accept radio waves as part of the natural world.
Oh,
Yeah, I was talking to my wife last night about that, about so-called magic, and I was all like, well, think about it. About 300 or 200 years ago, this guy came up and he said he had a magic spell, in different words, and that this magic spell would allow him to communicate with people far away instantaneously. And you know what? People tried it out, and hey, it worked. So it wasn't magic; it was called the telegraph.
Yep.
Yeah. Or that great sorcerer Marconi.
Oh yeah.
How do you know empiricism and logic is necessary for something to be true? Wrong way around. Empiricism and logic is how you can determine if something is true. Because if you can't do a test that turns out one way if the thing is true and the other way if the thing is false, how are you going to know if it's true or false?
Mm. Yeah, I don't know about you, Shane, but I've noticed that some of our live streams have become more religious lately.
I don't know. Maybe it's just the people in the chat.
Yeah. Well, I think another reason is because I think, some religious groups are taking advantage of the whole SJW culture, and there's people, especially YouTubers, coming online saying, oh, the reason we have social justice warriors is because we've lost our faith in God and all that. It's like, no, we have SJWs because in the 80s and 90s we were a bunch of pansies that were afraid of our own shadows, and we told our kids, "Oh, don't go outside, don't try anything. I don't want my precious, beautiful, perfect angel getting hurt or have their feelings hurt."
Yeah, and we can't have people winning and losing in sporting events because if they lose, their feelings will be hurt. So we'll just give everyone participation trophies.
Yeah, that's what caused the SJW movement. It wasn't our loss in religion. It was our loss in our, I don't want to sound like a religious guy. It was a loss in our old values, the values that you work hard, if you want to get to where you want, and you're going to fall and scrape your knees every now and then. And it's all about getting back up and learning from it. We've lost that.
So Devin Rojas says, do you believe in the paranormal or do you think it's just mass hysteria? I don't think those are the only two alternatives. I think most people don't really have a good grounding in basic science. And so whenever they come across something confusing, like I said, with the radio waves, they can only, interpret that because of their level of knowledge. They could only understand it in paranormal terms. And that's, when we see a lot of weird things today, it's just we attribute the, like, oh, there's someone I hadn't thought about in years. I thought about them, and then the phone called and it was them. So there must have been something psychic. Well, no, that's just the thing that happens.
There's a fundamental assumption that a lot of people make that's so ridiculously false once you understand a little bit about neuroscience and stuff. And I think the assumption a lot of people make is that consciousness is something simple, when really there's nothing simple about it. I mean, look how complex our brains are, and that's
oh yeah,
that network of logic gates that's in our brain is what consciousness is. It is this. It can't be described in simple terms. It's just a huge, complicated network of information that is interacting. And so explaining something by a consciousness, well, that consciousness has to have some sort of medium to function through. And so you really haven't explained anything, because how could that medium exist but be immaterial and stuff? Like, maybe it could, but then it would also be testable, and then it would respond rationally. Like, if there really was a ghost, how come we can't set it? I mean, that's a very testable hypothesis. If there's a ghost, then ask the ghost to, maybe it can only do these weak electromagnetic interactions or whatever. Fine. But then you could set up a test where the information generated by that, is very specific. And if it can pass that specificity test, where the odds that it would produce this string of bits of information is just astronomically unlikely without an actual consciousness, then you could conclude that, yeah, maybe a ghost exists.
Just set up something like a magnetic Ouija board where you have, a compass and the letters are all around it, and have it spell out words on the compass. Yeah, that's all you'd have to do.
Yeah, or they claim that electronic voice phenomenon is something. Okay, well, you could set it up where you could have the ghost just hum, so that there is some frequency that appears at certain times, and maybe you turn your instrument so that it's so sensitive that it's like roughly 50-50. But if the ghost is real, then the information that produces won't be just random, and so it will produce consistent answers, and so it can actually be tested to a extremely high degree of certainty whether or not there is a ghost.
Well,
Assuming that
well,
it could communicate through, that it is intelligent and can communicate in some way through the electromagnetic spectrum because of the specificity of the information that you could gather. But
well,
they
what's
always
interesting
fail that
about
test because they ask questions that could be like either way, but it's not like, somebody writes down a number nobody else sees and, what is that number? And then they, guess what the number is. And
yeah,
it
but
never
the
passes
interesting
those
thing
tests.
about EVP though is mostly what they seem to get are babies and soldiers, and they're saying, "Oh well, because the baby died so early, and that was traumatic, and because the soldiers die, in trauma." Is it that, or is it because well over 95% of the wireless signals around us are either military communications or baby monitors?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that in that really old video you did about pareidolia, and the non baby soldier stuff they get often has been found to just be like static or something like that.
Well, I mean, you might get another stray communication here
Yeah.
and there,
I
but
think I saw a joke like that one time, where they're doing that E thing and they're like, "Oh, I'm hearing something. I hear the ghost." "Oh, really? What's it saying?" "It's saying, would you like to supersize that?"
yeah.
Yeah, it's getting they're getting
Well, you know that's not the case if you can actually understand what they're saying, because I can
Well-
never understand. Right? Why can't they put good speakers on those things? Tell me about.
Oh yeah, that's
We've got these huge high fidelity, Dolby 7.1 Atmos and subwoofers and everything, and our drive-throughs still sound like Thomas Edison going, "Mary had a little lamb, its flesh was white as snow."
Yeah, I've heard they do. I've heard some of them actually deliberately do that for the TV show so they can, put the subtitles in and then utilize pareidolia, to trick you, Because
Oh yeah, because if you look at it without the subtitles, you can't make it out.
Yeah, yeah, especially with backtracking, they always say, "Oh, if you play this backwards, you'll hear some evil stuff." And I'm like, all I hear is some guy going, "Yazoo, yazoo, yazoo," and you don't hear the words until they actually put them there.
Yeah, but it sounds kind of demonic, especially if you play it a little bit slower.
Yeah. But the thing is,
what you would do is you would turn on your record player, with the old-fashioned turntable, but you would not have the motor off, and you would just put your finger on it and turn it the wrong way around, and yeah.
If I recall correctly, in the film industry, a common thing they often do to get scary sounds is they have people, just talk randomly, and then they reverse the speech, and then they slow it down a little bit, and they use that in the background to give like a suspicion of like, oh, this place is spooky and scary.
I guess the chat is talking about free will. Somebody, Cinema is saying the entire creation is determined by the logos, but man isn't hard determined by matter. Why not? Why wouldn't man be hard determined by matter?
This is another one. This is another one that just seems to have cropped up like in the past year or so, or last few months. We seem to be talking about the free will determinism debate a lot more. I don't know what
Cinema says he's a determinist. I'm going to ask him something. Hey, Cinema, if you're a determinist, then how do you explain incalculable numbers? Or incomputable numbers, I meant.
Uncomputable numbers, yeah.
Uncomputable numbers, yeah. No
yeah,
answer?
I think I made this point either that last live stream or the one before, because since most of the numbers that there are infinitely more uncomputable numbers than computable, then how can anything possibly be deterministic? And they actually think that that's the reason for things like the uncertainty principle of quantum mechanics, is because most of what is going on with these particles is uncomputable.
Well, I think that's just because that's the way God made it.
Eliezer Yudkowsky made a pretty convincing case for the many worlds hypothesis as a solution to quantum uncertainty.
Yeah, I've always been more of a many worlds guy myself. The Copenhagen people, I don't think they understand Occam's razor, because I think they're misapplying it. They say that many worlds violates Occam's razor because you're not supposed to put anything extra, and you're putting in all of these, extra universes, and you're not supposed to do it. Well, no, the extra alternate timelines come about as a result of decoherence, and it's the Copenhagen interpretation that throws in this quantum waveform collapse thing to basically kind of avoid alternate universes, and that is the one that violates Occam's razor, because they don't have any evidence for waveform collapse. They don't have a mechanism for it. They don't really have any reason to believe it's there, other than you're just looking at it from the conception of this being the only universe.
Yeah, a lot of people, I mean, I'm not into I barely understand quantum mechanics myself, but a lot of people seem to really misinterpret, the multiple, universes theory. Like, they're like, oh, so there's an alternate universe where we're all pink polka dotted creatures and all that. And it's like, not really. It's
it's
actually there is.
It's the same. No, it's the same universe with the same physical laws. That's different from multiverse theory, where you can have different universes with different physical laws.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a classic example that, a lot of people bring up is that one time, where you're feeling hungry, but you don't feel like cooking, so you decide to go to a fast food place, and you're like, well, where do I go to? Do I go to McDonald's or go to a Taco Bell? And you decide to make a decision, and the different, whatever you said is, is just that the only difference is that in that, different era in quantum mechanics is you went to Taco Bell instead of McDonald's, but nothing else changed. It's the same world, same laws. It's just slightly different events.
Yeah, I mean, there would be an alternate timeline that is absolutely identical to ours in every single way, except some tree down in the Amazon has an extra leaf.
Yeah, it's...
And cinema,
literally everything you can imagine actually exists in a as a consequence of the many worlds hypothesis.
Yeah, actually,
well, not unless if what you're imagining violates the laws of physics, then it would.
Yes, there is that caveat. I mean, there can't be information sent faster than the speed of light, for example. But basically, any arrangement of matter that is possible, like that isn't an inherent violation of the laws of physics, is real.
And cinema, it absolutely does contradict determinism, because determinism is based on the idea that I think it's called Laplace's demon, which is if you had absolute knowledge of the universe, if you knew the position and velocity of every single particle, then you would be able to predict how the universe happen and everything that happens in it to infinity, and we know that's not the case.
Yeah, I mean,
and that is the core of determinism. That is the central tenet of it. That's how everything
only
gets
because
determined.
We're a part of the universe, and so our access to information is inherently limited because we're a part of it. So, but the idea that I mean, if you could build a computer outside of the universe that did have all the information about every quantum interaction, and then compile it forward, it would produce all of the with infinite memory. It could produce all of the inevitable futures and their relative proportions to each other.
It would have to compute every possible alternative. It wouldn't be where, you have the uncertainty principle, which means that I can't, even if I know, everything about a particle, I can't know where it's going to be, a nanosecond from now or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, oh, we humans are limited to this knowledge. It's a limitation of the universe itself.
Right, of the universe itself. But but in the sense of well, as it relates to free will, in a certain sense, yeah, from our limited knowledge about the state of quantum information, or our knowledge being inherently limited. Hold on, I gotta hold this thought.
Haha, little Elon.
Oh, sounds
Yeah.
like the kid wants to add his 2 cents.
If you're doubting the concept of emergence, just look at Alex and little Elon and listen to the words we're saying, and consider that the only thing that is happening that is making you perceive that is a bunch of switches are clicking on and off. That's what all this is. That's what all this is.
Oh, sorry. I'm about to say, Cinema says, I believe in free will as a compatibilist, but I am definitely a determinist. That's self-contradictory.
Well, I think the compatibilists, I think they try to be determinists, but it's like, where's your link up to free will? It's kind of like, I think it's just kind of wanting the best of both worlds.
It's kind of like Hoppian libertarianism, where it's like, you want free market capitalism, but you only want it on a national level because anyone that tries to come into your country without your permission, well, that's just like violating my property rights, right? It's, yeah.
Okay, I'm back. I was saying that the free will is just kind of the illusion of not knowing what you're going to do, because of course, to know what you're going to do, you have to compute through all the processes in your own brain, which is inherently impossible because you can't compute faster than you can compute, and so inherently you don't know what you're going to do, and so that creates this illusion that, oh, I have choice. Well, your choice is determined by information that you don't have access to and you can't foresee, but that doesn't mean that information, your choices aren't determined by something outside of your mind.
Well, the problem with that is that doesn't contradict the claim of free will, because free will people say, well, of course, we're going to base our decision, based on what happens around us and our learning experience. It's just that we have the capability of making the decisions ourselves, and we're not a complete slave to it. You can have 2 children, even identical twins, who are brought up the same way with completely different opinions on things.
No, but but if you ran the universe forward, put it back in the exact same state that it was, things would play out the exact same way. I guess what I'm saying is that the concept of free will just seems really incoherent. It seems to mean whatever is the opposite of what you interpret it to mean when you're discrediting it.
Yeah, and actually, Shane, this whole thing about determinism and how, you talk about how, we try to do these experiments, where we think if you manipulate it correctly, we can get the right results, but we still don't get it. I think a perfectly good example of some of those gender experiments they've done where they've tried to prove that, all the social and mental characteristics of men and women is all, societally driven, and it's not anything natural. They try doing that where they make, girls, play like boys and boys play like girls, and yet they still, for the most part, act, psychologically like boys and girls.
Well, yeah, but I don't see what that has to do with free will.
Yeah. Well, I mean that. I'm just saying it mostly debunks determinism, because I think the point of free will is that a person's going to be their own person regardless of what you try to do. Then again,
a person is going to be their person dependent on their environment. So whether you treat, like the whole thing with punishing criminals, well, could they control their criminal behavior? In a certain sense, no, but you can't establish it as a policy that you don't punish criminals, because then that says to all other criminals you won't be punished. And so it creates a different circumstance under which people's behaviors will be different.
I will say this, though. The thing that's self-contradicting about those studies about how they say, well, it's all about nurture and not nature. I'm like, well, then if it's all nurture and not nature, then we wouldn't have, the quote unquote boy girl stereotype, because there has to be because there would be nothing to learn from then. There wouldn't be an original there would be no because millions of years ago when we were still barely past our primate phase, we didn't have violent video games or boy girl stereotypes and all that. So it's like, well, then where'd it come from? Because the nurture theory has to have a starting point. It's like God, it's like, well, if God's the reason this happened, then where'd God come from? It's like, it's self-contradictory. It just goes in a circle.
But I mean, it's in between. They're both nature and nurture playing a
Well, yeah, I
playing a
know
role.
that. I know that. But it's been shown that boys and girls do act differently. Now, it's not the stereotypical way, but it is shown that
But I mean,
that's why
the basic point, though, when you're talking about knowing the position and velocity of a particle, it's not that they have a position and velocity and we can't know it, but if we could predict it. It's that they don't have a discrete position and velocity in any real sense of the term until they're observed.
Yeah.
Well, sure,
Actually,
but that doesn't. I mean, you're thinking in terms of there being only one future, but of course, all possible futures do exist or
No, but I
will
mean,
exist.
even in the many worlds, in fact, especially in the many worlds interpretation, you don't actually have. So, like in the double slit experiment, where you observe the same photon going through both slits at the same time and being in two places at the same time, that happens in many worlds too. Because you've got that same idea where they don't really have a discrete position until they're observed, and you get decoherence. That's the point at which the two timelines diverge. Before then, you still have both timelines, but they're commingled together. But as soon as the probabilities of the two different states diverge to the point where they're no longer compatible and you get decoherence, that's the point where they branch off.
There aren't two different states. So there's the wave function, and it propagates, and then when an interaction happens, it doesn't just have a discrete interaction. Literally, all the that entire wave collapses into the multitude of universes where that's every dot or every possible place on your detector where it could have manifest split off at that point. From
but I mean, the point I was making, even before you get to the detector, the point where it's going through at the same time, you can say, okay, in one timeline it goes through one slit, and another timeline it goes through the other slit, but actually at that point, it's still the same timeline, which is why it can interfere with itself.
Right,
because those two
it's
timelines haven't
propagating as a
diverged
wave
at
at that point.
Right.
Well, it's always propagating at.
Well,
it's
and
always
with
propagating
many worlds,
as a wave. It's just that there are discrete points where that wave splits off into the. Yeah, it decoheres.
With many worlds, you don't really have the particle wave duality like you have with Copenhagen, where it's a wave until you observe it and then it's a particle. With many worlds, it's just kind of the same thing. I've heard some of them use the term wavicle to describe it.
That's why Schrodinger developed the cat theory.
Well, it's not a theory; it's a thought experiment. But
well,
yeah,
I know,
he was pointing out the absurdity with Copenhagen.
Yeah. Actually, Shane, this whole conversation about that, it kind of reminds me. It reminds me of this one Doctor Who episode I saw one time where, where Doctor Who, at the end, the Doctor, saves these people from Vesuvius, and one partner later says, "Wait a minute, how could you save those people, but you couldn't save, my dad without destroying, the timeline?" And he pointed out, well, because I don't know how to explain it, but those people were fluxes, but your dad was a flow. And she asked, well, what's that? It's like, well, the flow. Well, what a flow is something that it's attached to the timeline, and it means it's important. So if you interfere with it, it's going to cause massive damage to the time-space continuum, whereas a flux is so insignificant, you can interfere with it, and it'll just get lost in the noise.
Yeah, and when the Doctor has tried to interfere with a fixed point, or one time when River Song tried to interfere with a fixed point, really bad things happened.
Yeah, a flux and a flow. Like I said, a flux means like like, contrary to what A Sound of Thunder says, if you were to accidentally step on a butterfly back in the prehistoric era, it wouldn't do much because it's just one butterfly. But if you were to step and kill the first, creature that would become the dinosaur, that would cause a massive timeline damage.
But I mean,
there's
it
a
just kind of all
difference.
depends, because like if you look at the Mandelbrot set, if you change something in the chaos area, it's not going to make a difference. If you make a change out, at the border where it's nicely ordered, it's not going to make anything. But when you're in that little area in between, where people love zooming in and seeing all the things, you make a tiny little change and it has huge differences.
Well, especially in the evolution of life, because every mutation has every mutation that causes a species to rise up. There's a lot of single mutations that have resulted in a dramatic shift in life. For example, the evolution of lignin in giving rise to woody plants. That probably stems from a single point mutation. And if you did anything in the world prior to that point, then that mutation would not have occurred at that exact moment in time, because it was a huge 1 in a trillion fluke, and so I think the butterfly effect really is real and dramatic, because you really will, over a certain amount of time, have dramatically different outcomes.
Well, I mean, I think it depends, because when you look at things like bacteria mutating to be able to digest nylon or plastic or other things they've observed, like when they found the plastic eating bacteria in Japan, they found it like the first couple of places they were looking for it. And they were like, wow, if it's this easy for us to find, then it must be happening all over the planet, because the idea that, that's the only place on the earth that happened, and they just happened to find it right off the bat, was just so absurd. So, I mean, these mutations, an individual mutation might be incredibly unlikely, but a mutation that does the same sort of thing might be a lot more likely than you think. So, I mean, if you have a bunch of plastic around all over the place, it's pretty much inevitable that sooner or later bacteria are going to mutate to be able to digest it.
Yeah, but the how efficiently they digest it could be dramatically impacted, because the gene has less potential to be effective, or something like the what was it, when the mitochondrion incorporated itself and gave rise to eukaryotic cells. That has really only happened once in Earth history, and if it didn't happen at that exact, that one time, it could have been a billion years before, it happened to a different bacterium, which means,
or it might have happened a billion years earlier. I mean, they didn't have to,
or it didn't happen, or it wouldn't happen at all on this planet. I mean, the thing is that the change would be most likely extremely profound. You'd have dramatically different organisms on this earth. You wouldn't have what you would consider humans. It would just like that. That's remarkably improbable if you changed just that one event, and that one event would almost certainly not have happened if anything, even the slightest, single molecule was out of place, because eventually that would change the position of all the molecules to a certain degree, probably enough to prevent certain mutations from happening. And so if you changed anything prior to the event of that one particular event, then it would certainly dramatically change the course of life on this planet.
Okay, my brain's
but who's to say that that forming a eukaryote is the only way to go from bacteria to multicellular life? I mean, there might have been other ways it could happen, and that's just the way it happened here. Just, and if it hadn't happened that way, it might have happened some other way, but we don't see those other ways because we've already got multicellular life forms that are dominating.
Right, absolutely.
And so the others don't have a
it,
chance.
right, and absolutely, but that would be a dramatically different form of life. So things would be dramatically different. We can't say that intelligent life wouldn't evolve, or hey, maybe bacteria life. We don't know enough about astrobiology to say this, but maybe bacteria life is extremely common in the universe, but multicellular life is extremely rare. A lot of astrobiologists uh, uh, believe this or suspect that this might be the case, because the
Well,
universe
and
could
that
be
makes
infinite.
sense.
We have no idea.
But I
If
mean,
the
that
universe is
makes sense if
infinite,
you.
we really have no idea how rare intelligent life is because of the anthropic principle.
Right, but I mean, we only have this one planet to look at. But given that, almost immediately as soon as the planet cooled, you had bacteria, but then it took billions of years to get multicellular life, and then it took hundreds of million years after that to get intelligent life. So getting life is easy. Getting intelligent life, that's a little trickier.
Yeah, from our single data point, which is the evolutionary history of life on Earth. Yeah, it took like 2-3 billion years for life to go from bacteria to multicellular, and then it changed relatively rapidly after that, but especially rapidly after the advent of eukaryotic cells and photosynthesis. There are a few specific points. Um, I think we mentioned them all, where life really started to accelerate.
But I'm trying to remember. I don't even remember what it's called. But the idea of multiple species of bacteria coming together to make eukaryotes. I don't think that was all one step. I think it happened in stages. But
Yeah, but
I don't remember
depended.
exactly.
It still depended on circumstances that were extremely unlikely. So these specific circumstances that because it took a billion years to go to eukaryotic cells, it's quite possible that the odds of that are one time in a billion years, or 10 billion years, or 100 billion years.
Yeah, I mean, there's no real way for us to know until we find life somewhere else and take a look at that.
Yeah, we really need more data points to calculate these probabilities. But what I think is really interesting is that we can take pictures of these galaxies. There's lots of galaxies within a billion light years from us, but I've never heard of a galaxy that has this black dot on it where all the stars are blackened out. And I think that is a really interesting. Um, you can draw a really interesting conclusion from that, because if intelligent life evolves and it gets to the point where it starts spreading throughout the solar system, or throughout the galaxy, at near the speed of light, or a significant fraction of the speed of light, it'll spread and probably will build little Dyson spheres around each star system that it colonizes. And it shouldn't take it more than a million years or so to build a Dyson sphere, if it's growing at an exponential rate. So how come we haven't seen a galaxy infected with something that's building Dyson spheres around all these stars, and which would naturally spread out in kind of a spherical, as fast as the speed of light? They can go in every direction. So we should be able to see something like that. Like a
Well,
little
how
black
do you know?
dot.
How do you know we haven't? Because remember, we're only seeing this from one vantage point, and it might be obscured by stars that are in between us.
I mean, there might be places that are obscured, but we've taken pictures of lots of galaxies, and we don't. And I've never seen a picture of a galaxy with a black spot. Just an ominous,
But I mean, if
almost
you're
perfectly circular black spot, and that's interesting. That suggests that life, or at least intelligent life, is extremely rare.
But I mean, it's like you were saying. Well, let's just think of a spiral galaxy. If you were thinking, like, if it takes like a million years to make a Dyson sphere or something like that, if you think about all of the thousands of stars they would have to do that to, in order to make a hole like that. By the time
But
they
they're not
did that,
doing it
those stars,
sequentially.
it
See,
doesn't matter, because by the time they do it, the stars would be, orbiting the galaxy at slightly different times, and you'd have new stars moving into the area and Dyson spheres moving out of it, and it would kind of get smeared out over time.
Well, uh, I'm saying, less than 1,000,000 years to build a Dyson sphere, and I think it should be much less than that, considering the exponential, growth rate of humans. I mean, it seems like we double our population every 25 years or something.
Yeah,
So,
but also the
uh,
the 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 distance between two stars is really, 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 really big. So
right, but we
you've
could
got that in your way.
we know how to travel at, we could, in theory, build a ship that could get. We've worked out the engineering behind it. Could get to Alpha Centauri, and accelerate and slow down and stop to start colonization. We could do that on the order of a few centuries, because we know, even with today's technology, a nuclear pulse jet rocket could reach 1% the speed of light and slow down from 1% the speed of light, and then we could colonize. Now, the galaxy is only 100,000 light years across. So even moving at 1% the speed of light, it would only take you 10 million years to send these ships all the way across the galaxy. Now, maybe it takes them a few hundred years to stop, rebuild their architecture back up so that they can send the next ship. But nonetheless, that still means that they're traveling at 0.5% the speed of light. Should only take about 20 million years to wipe out an entire galaxy.
And
So,
also, who's to say they would necessarily be building Dyson spheres? Because I mean, the idea of a Dyson sphere is you're getting like every last little photon that the star gives out. But I mean, are you going to need that much energy in a
well,
single star system? Because remember, it's not just like the ability to travel in space that's getting, it's also, you're increasing your economic efficiencies and you're able to do more and more per unit of energy.
well, yeah, but if you have any sort of system, whether that's an AI system or a biological system that has this drive to propagate, to proliferate, to reproduce, right? Then it's going to naturally try to do that, because as long as there's energy available, it's going to use it, because that's one more generation that they could produce, right? So if you have a system that is fundamentally driven towards reproduction, then it's pretty likely that that it is going to build Dyson spheres. Now, it might not be that most biological systems end up building Dyson spheres, but I think it's reasonable to assume that a significant fraction of them would. So the fact that we don't see these blemishes on galaxies that are only a few million light years away, some of them, I think that bodes well for us, in that it might actually be a good thing that we're alone in this universe, because then we have all these resources available, and we don't have this existential threat of, that AI system that's reproducing and going to wipe out this whole galaxy in the next 20 million years. That's not going to happen, and so the human experience might go on much longer than we would anticipate, if we're not competing for the finite resources of the universe.
Why don't we have Chris or Nicholas pick a subject that they can, because we've been kind of dominating this.
Yeah, I think you seem to forgot we were here. Man, and I thought I was a chatty Cathy. Man, just get you in fourth to talk about science and biomechanics, and you guys will just go on and on.
Nicholas, you got anything you want to talk about?
You know what? I will just say this. You know what I was on the verge of doing? I was on the verge of just turning this on, and right in the middle of your conversation, just yell, "Baba Booey! Fourth and Shane are nerds! Baba Booey!" Yeah.
Well, talk about something, Nicholas.
Yeah, like where'd you get those kick-ass shades?
It's called Google PNG.
I didn't know they had that back in Tsarist Russia.
or
I bet you
whatever.
can buy real life shades that are modeled to look exactly like that pixel art.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
By the way,
Picking
By
those
the
up.
way, guys, you missed a little comment I posted in the chat. I jokingly said, "Wow, Shane, you and Forth's conversation is giving me PTSD flashbacks from back when I was in school." Yeah.
No, if you want to experience true PTSD and a true existential crisis, there is a particular article about AI and why we really are screwed. Elon Musk tweeted this a long time ago, and I read it, and I was like, "Oh crap, we really are screwed."
I think
I think it was Elise Yudkowsky had this challenge that several people have taken, and the idea is he plays the role of an AI, and they've got this box that, I mean, the box could represent, like, Asimov's laws or whatever, but you're keeping the AI in the box, and as long as the AI is in the box, everything's safe. As soon as a human has to let the AI out of the box, but as soon as he does, the AI takes over the world. And the challenge is Elysier would play the part of the AI, and someone else who thinks, well, I would never let him out of the box. And it's like different parameters, like they talk for an hour or something like that. But I mean, they have people like who are, I'll accept that challenge. There's no way I'm going to let you out of the box. And they end up tweeting, I let him out of the box. He convinced them to let him, playing the role of the AI, convinced them to let him out of the box.
Shane, it reminds me of this.
I was so curious because one of the stipulations was that they weren't allowed to say how they were let out of the box,
right?
Per an agreement. I was so curious about that, even knowing I'll probably lose this bet. Like I emailed him and offered him $50 if you do that experiment with me, but he never got back to me.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, well, he's a busy guy. He has a lot.
Kind of, what it kind of reminds me of. I think, when it comes to science and all that, I think, Shane, do you think that sometimes we take science a little too far? Like we become so obsessed with trying to see if we can do it, we never stop to ask if we should do it?
Well, I think there are some things where you kind of lose perspective. Like you see things like pi to 38 digits will describe a circle the size of the observable universe to the width of a hydrogen atom, and I think 60 digits will do it to the width of a Planck length, which is the smallest distance you can get in the quantum universe. And yet we've got all these computers, I think they're up to like 21 trillion digits of pi, and there's all this computing power going to like getting more and more digits of pi, more digits, and people are like, don't you think that computing power to be put to something better, like folding proteins or something?
I actually saw this parody one time where a person comes from another dimension, and he puts and basically he puts a cap limiter, device on humanity, so our intelligence and our sense of curiosity reaches only a certain level. But one person is immune to it, and he asks them, "Dude, why are you trying to prevent us from being more and more creative?" And it's like, because there is a possibility of being way too perceptive of science, because the universe I came from was destroyed because we became so obsessed with trying to do all this science that eventually scientists developed a device that could destroy the entire universe just because they wanted to see if they could destroy the entire universe.
Yeah, but I think it's but in the case of pi, it's like you're at 21 trillion digits, and you're no closer to the end than you were when you started. So
yeah, we know pi is an infinite number. So stop trying to find more.
These are cosmos enthusiasts. You probably remember the film Cosmos, but it was, of course, based off of a novel written by Carl Sagan. And in the novel,
actually, you're talking about Contact, not Cosmos.
Not Cosmos. Contact. In Contact, in the novel Contact, they the next phase, after they had received the radio signals and built the machine and went off and came back, their next phase was they studied pi and found out that after some huge number of digits, then it started to give them another packet of information that they
Yeah,
could
there
build
was an
another machine or something.
Yeah, it was an information dump written inside the digits of pi from the creator.
Actually, oh great, now I lost my train of thought because you guys went at it again.
That kind of doesn't make any sense because pi is an inherently simple mathematical concept, and so you can't really encode any information into it.
Well, and that's one of
more
the
complicated than the concept itself.
well, and that's one of the things that that I've talked about. You know, creationism and God creating the universe, and how many decisions could God have made about the universe. And one of the things that I ask is, could God have made a decision to make pi a different number? Or as soon as you get 2 dimensions and you can have a circle, pi is going to be that big, long, irrational number.
Yeah.
Well, because pi is a human construct. It's not a universal construct. It's
mathematical. It's the ratio.
It exists outside of a universe. It exists in our model of the universe, our model of geometry.
But the point is, as long as you have 2 dimensions, you can have a situation where you have a point, you have a whole bunch of points that are equidistant from that point, and it makes a circle, and then you measure the distance around and the distance across, and if you can measure that with precision, you get pi. And so the question is,
you're assuming the universe really has dimensions. Really, there's just these mathematical interactions that make us perceive it in this model that we have ingrained into our consciousness. But it might, for example, the universe might be a simulation, in which case dimensions are meaningless, and maybe the real universe doesn't even have spatial dimensions.
And this is why mathematicians are like heroin addicts. And the end of the number line is the purple magic dragon. You know you're not gonna reach it, but you still keep trying to reach it. Why?
Well, and that's what I think it was one of Matt Parker's videos. He was actually talking about something we mentioned earlier, uncomputable numbers, and he was drawing all these circles. It's like, okay, here are the integers, and then here are all of the real numbers, and then here are all the imaginary, here are all the rational numbers, and here are all the, and he said, and I'm just going to draw this. And he kind of drew, kind of this slightly curvy line and say, yeah, this circle is going to be all of the uncomputable numbers.
Yeah,
and most of the numbers we have are uncomputable.
In all honesty, Shane, I think that's the reason I hated math so much when I was a kid, even though it was ironically the subject I was the best at, is because, I understand, some of these things are fun, but I guess you could say I'm kind of a pragmatist, and I'm more concerned about it being practical. And it's one of those things where, there's a lot of math equations that are very important and they will help us out in life. But like you said, with pi, it's reaching a point where it's like we're trying to find all these patterns and numbers and all that. And then it's like, well, that's cool and all, but how's this contributing to mankind prospering? What's contributing this? It's like, well, it's interesting. No, you're just you're just finding fancy ways to compute numbers, but if it doesn't serve a practical purpose, what's the point?
Well, I mean,
it's
like
kind
if
of
you
like
took
a wax on, wax off sort of thing, because if you reach a level in mathematical theory where you can figure out how to compute 2.7 trillion digits of pi, you had to invent some clever new tricks in computing to be able to do that. So it actually does lead to the endeavor leads to new technologies and new algorithms, but
no, actually, I think we've been using the same algorithms that have existed for like 100 years. It's just that we're making more powerful computers. But like if we had taken that computing power, like I said earlier, and dedicated it towards protein folding, what might we have discovered?
We might have found a cure. We might have found a cure for prionic diseases.
Right.
Yeah, that's what prions are, people. Actually, here's where you can talk about a different topic. It's still somewhat science related, but it's more medical. I was playing this game called Dead Island, and the zombie disease is caused by a prion, and it's pretty clearly by the writing that they don't know what prions are. Yeah,
if I had $30 million to make a zombie movie, I know exactly the movie I'd make. There's a parasite that actually grows inside a crab and grows through all of its limbs and takes it over. And so my idea of the zombie is you have a similar parasite that just grows inside, and its fibers wrap around our bones and everything, and then it kills us and moves us around.
Yeah, I had a friend who took a parasite zombie idea. Did you know that there is a fungus that infects ants?
Yeah,
and
cordyceps.
it causes the ant to
The
want
Last
to
of Us
climb
already did
up,
that, although
right? And then this stalk grows out of its head, and poof, and it
yeah,
spreads
and The
to
Last
spores
of
and
Us, that's what
Yeah.
caused the
So,
zombie
yeah.
outbreak in The Last
So
of Us, even though that's scientifically impossible, because people are always like, oh, so zombies are a possibility, but one person pointed out, well, the thing is that ants are relatively simple creatures. If you were to try to infect a more complex creature with a cordyceps, the cordyceps would just be destroyed by the immune system. And I find it so funny when people talk about how I think probably the most poorly written, super bug ever is has to be Captain Trips from The Last Stand, or whatever it's called, The Stand by Stephen King, and that it's immune to antibodies. And a lot of people have pointed out, including some biochemists, say that is 100% impossible. It can be resistant to antibodies, but people who say, well, we've created this pathogen that's immune to antibodies, they seem to forget the human immune system mutates and evolves too.
Yeah. But it's like my idea is that the bigger they get, first of all, you'd start off with the lumbering zombies, but then it would get better and you'd have zombies that can actually run and actually be a threat. Excuse me, that's what I'm about.
There's actually
I also had
rabies
this
is actually
idea.
a really good analog for a zombie virus, because rabies does cause irrational behavior and increased aggression, and if you coupled that with like insatiable hunger, you'd have a pretty good zombie apocalypse.
Let me tell you my ultimate idea, because my ultimate idea is that the bigger these parasite creatures get, and I mean, because eventually the humans are getting skeletonized, but the bigger and more complex they get, the smarter they get, and you end up with these big ones made out of the skeletons of like a couple of dozen humans, and it's like fighting, the big boss at the last level, in a video game, and they get smarter and they can use strategy. And so I think that would be an awesome movie to do.
Shane, you just described the Flood from the Halo series.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, that's the Flood. Yeah, the Flood are these extra, and I haven't played Halo, but I know about them. The Flood is basically these extra, solar parasitic organisms that have been around, for quite a long time. And when they infect a person, they do just like you said. They kill the person, but they still take over the physical body. And they start out as very, very simple-minded creatures that are only focused on feeding and reproducing. But as they become bigger and more collective, they soon develop a hive mind and are able to strategize.
I wasn't even thinking a hive mind. I was just thinking of a single intelligent entity.
In the games, that's what they are. They're a hive mind that is controlled by one single intelligent individual, and every individual, Flood through some weird telepathic reason is able to immediately spread on what they learn to others. So,
but you see, the nice thing about this is something that could actually happen in our physical world. I mean, you could make this as a hard science fiction movie if there were such a parasite. It doesn't require anything to be undead or reanimated. It doesn't require any telepathy. It could actually happen.
Well, and here's the thing, Shane, though, when it comes to stuff like that is, and I think ultimately the reason why, contrary to what we see a lot, the reason why, and a lot of scientists have said, the reason why a pathogen, like a super pathogen, will never lead to an extinction of an entire species as a whole is quite simply because people fail to realize it is possible for a disease or a parasite forever to be too deadly. But I mean, if it's too deadly like Ebola is incredibly deadly, but that's also the reason why we haven't had a pandemic, because it kind of burns itself out quickly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, again, going back to Captain Trips from The Stand, it's a deadly strain of the flu that you immediately become infected and you die within a few days, and that's not going to spread from person to person all over the country. It'll spread to a population, but they'll all die off before it has a chance to do that. It'll snuff itself out, That's
Well,
that's
but I mean,
the-
unless it's something like the bubonic plague where you have a non-human vector.
yeah. Well, that's the only way it can do that. It has to have an asymptomatic. It either has to have an asymptomatic vector or it has to be non-lethal. That's the reason
He
why.
died. He got zombified. How about the idea of a mimetic zombie apocalypse?
You cut out there for a second. What kind of apocalypse?
Mimetic. How? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna write zombie on my hand, and I'm patient 0, right? And then I'm gonna go and I'm gonna write zombie on as many other people's hands and tell them that they're now zombies. You just gotta write zombie on your hand.
And
So
then someone punches you in the face and kills you. End of the
Well,
zombie outbreak.
Yeah, that's Lovecraftian.
but-
That's Lovecraftian.
I just have to
territory you're
infect
getting
more
into.
than a couple of people, and then and they too have to like the game enough that they'll be driven to do that, and maybe that actually would spread through the world. That would be cool.
This sounds a bit to me like when the .com bubble was going on, and I heard people saying, "Oh, all I have to do is make a website where 1 million people just give me $1, and that's all I have to do is give me $1, and then I'll be rich." It's like, okay, how are you going to do it?
or well, there was one guy that did it with potato salad. He from Kickstarter, he only for $10, and he ended up getting like $50,000.
Well, I'm not asking for money, but
Yeah.
But the
it
point
probably
is you would
can't
still
happen
have
because
to-
people
it's like-
have
it's
probably
like a
already tried this.
letter. It's like you're doing a human chain letter is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes
chain
those
letters-
get big.
Yeah, but chain letters burn out after a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the zombie thing probably would burn out after a while, but it could get to the point where like it's possible that it gets to the point where everybody's heard about this new
Yeah, the
wave.
same thing happens with like memes, like a perfectly good example is with planking. I mean, people, were worried about planking and all that, but the funny irony is that by the time people were worried about planking being dangerous, if I recall correctly, planking was very obsolete, and the reason why people were criticizing planking wasn't because they were being dangerous, it was because, dude, why are you planking? Nobody does that anymore. You look stupid. It was more of nobody does it anymore. What are you doing?
If it does go viral, it's only its ubiquity that can kill it.
Well, I mean that's the thing. When you see something like that gets too popular, it becomes not popular because it loses that kind of aspect of being unique, like you're a special person for doing it instead of just going along with the crowd.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, but I mean,
That's why every
that-
fad burns
I
out
mean-
for the same reason.
yeah, but every zombie apocalypse movie, somebody survives. Like I wonder what fraction of the population. Because the other thing is, like a lot of people, they wouldn't be interested in doing it, but then they don't really have a choice. All it takes is somebody to write zombie on their hand, and well, they were infected, right? If you get half the population who actually wants to spread it, the other half of the population, you could be down to like 1 million subscribers survivors in the entire United States.
Okay, how you gonna do it?
Well, it just depends on the how appealing the meme is to people. If they like the idea at first, right? The first time that they hear about it, if they like it and want to spread it and go ahead and write zombie on a few other people's hands.
But I mean,
if it reaches that virality point, then it will.
Long before you get to that point, people are going to be like, "Oh God, are you still doing that? That is so last year."
But people will only be all like, "Are you doing that?" If they've heard of it, and if they've heard of it, it's probably because somebody's written zombie on their hand. So if it ever gets to that point, I mean, there's already been success in the meme of having a zombie apocalypse.
I don't know how many people had heard of planking that never actually did it.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. I'm patient 0. I'm writing zombie on my hand in Sharpie.
Okay, you let us know how that goes.
Yeah.
Let us know how many people you can write zombie on and how many times you get beat up.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I won't do it in Sharpie, like I just did.
Kind of reminds me of that one South Park episode where they made fun of that, where people are, Faith Hilling, then they're Taylor Swifting, then they're Olon Johnson.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, and it's like
You guys are still so
and then wasn't it like as soon as Kyle started doing it, everyone had already moved on to something else, and Kyle was always behind it or something.
Well, that goes all the way back. Well, that goes all the way back to season 3 with the Pokemon, where like he's trying to get involved in the fad, but he keeps falling behind. You know, like every time he finally learns something and says, "Okay, now I know enough to get involved," they're like, "Oh, we don't do that anymore. We don't play the card game anymore. Now it's all about the video games." Okay, I got the video game and I mastered it. Oh, we don't play the video game anymore. Now we watch the TV show. Oh no, we're done with the TV show. Now we're doing this. It's like
I have thoroughly lost track with what the chat room's talking about. I'm looking at it now, and I am lost.
I think it's because you and Forth got so deeply involved in your conversation about astrophysics and math that a lot of people are like, okay, you know what, we're tuning out.
No, I mean there's a lot of stuff going on about exchange values with logical axioms, and you know. Like, do parents have the right to alter and change criminal behavior genes? It's like they're talking about genetic modification to eliminate criminality.
Creating the genetic code from
I will say this, Shane, on the subject of parents and all that. You know what really, not to go a Family Guy. You know what really grinds my gears? You know, we've had this conversation before. Are parents who think they have a psychic link with their kid. You know what I mean? Like, I understand the parents tend to know better about the kid than the government does, but that doesn't mean you have a psychic link with them, you know? That's why I get cringe. That's why I cringe really hard at those people that said, oh, my 6-year-old is definitely transgender because he tells me he wonders what it's like to be a woman sometimes. It's like, yeah, well, I'm pretty sure a lot of
normal curiosity.
Yeah, kids are thinking that all the time, you know? I mean, they always wonder.
Me of Jerry from Rick and Morty, you know, yeah, sure, I have thought about having a vagina.
Yeah, I mean, even as an adult, you know, there were times, you know, like in my 20s or whatever, when I was, you know, still kind of exploring everything sexually, and I just kind of like fantasized. It's like, okay, what if I were a woman having sex with a man? What would that feel like? You know, having, you know. I mean, yeah, everyone thought about that.
Not everybody says they've thought about it, but
you know, I mean, the same thing. I mean, the same thing. You know, the same thing with homosexuality. You know, and all that. You know, I mean, almost everyone's, you know, had a gay thought. That doesn't mean you're gay or bisexual. You know, I mean,
yeah, I've wondered that too. It's just like,
yeah, a lot of people.
I mean, I wasn't aroused by it, so I learned. That's how I learned I wasn't gay. That I was straight, but I was kind of like trying to say, okay, what would it be like having sex with another guy? And
yeah, you know, I mean, some people actually believe that's the reason why men tend to be very attracted to lesbian porn, women tend to be attracted to gay porn, is because it really amplifies, you know, that curiosity. You know, it really makes you wonder, what would it feel like if that were to happen to me, but I was the opposite sex, you know?
I think it's just because if you're not attracted to the same sex, the more you see of the same sex in a porn, you know, the less aroused you're going to be, because like even when you have heterosexual porn, you know, look at how little they depict the guy and how much they depict the woman.
Oh yeah, and they say pornography degrades women. It degrades men, you know.
I mean, the guy is the object. The woman, you're seeing her expressions and her desire and her ecstasy, and the guy's just a prop.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard from someone that flat out says, you know, the thing with women in pornography is that you could be the ugliest, you know, fattest woman in the world, and they can still find job for you in the porn industry, because there are people that are attracted to stuff like that. If you're a guy,
there's entire categories of stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
If you're a guy, you have to have a big dick.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, they don't care. They don't care about how big you are muscular wise. They want to see your equipment. And if you could be the most handsomest guy in the world, but if your equipment's not big enough, it's like, nope, we got nothing for you, man.
Your face could be like, you know, hideous and deformed. It's like, who cares? That's not going to be on the screen that long.
Oh yeah.
Roger.
Fun fact. The majority of guys that are in gay porn, they actually admit we are actually not gay. We are not sexually attracted to the opposite sex. We just do it for the money. And when we have to perform, we just take a couple ED pills and we just go with it.
This is a switch. The chat room is having the highbrow conversation about the ethics of genetic manipulation, and we're talking about porn. It's usually the other way around.
Yeah, speaking of porn and all that, it really makes me wonder, and I've had this conversation because I was talking about the guy who founded Kellogg's cereal, and I'm just like, what is it with like those really extremist religious people? What do they hate about sex,
I don't know. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I think I know the real reason why. This is the real reason why religious people are against sex. It's because they're not getting fucked, so they're thinking, well, if I can't get laid, then nobody can get laid.
I think it has to do apply mimetic theory again. If you have religious people who are sexually repressed and they are told their whole lives that the only wholesome way to have sex is to get married and do it for reproduction, then they're going to have more kids, and they do. So that's how they outbred the competition.
Another thing I've also heard from some people who are former members of like those Christian subgroups is that it's also to make you control. It's also a form of control because a lot of forms of Christianity also have diet restrictions, and the two most primal functions our bodies have is, as Penn Jillette points out, is feeding and fucking. And the idea is that if you can control what a person eats and when or who they can sleep with, you've basically controlled most of their behavior already. If you can control that, everything else will come easily.
Seems the chat's talking about eugenics.
Yeah, well, I think that's the idea. What's the difference between eugenics and editing genes? And I don't know, if you're talking about when you're forming an embryo, you have your own genes put in there, then that means the embryo is just a different person. But if you're doing that with the parents' genes for the parent's child, eugenics to me is where you say, okay, we're going to take this part of the population and not let them breed even if they want to. Whereas if it's the parents making the decision, I wouldn't really say that was eugenics.
I think that I of course am disgusted by the idea of like hard eugenics, like no, you can't breed. But I think that there definitely needs to be a cultural shift where we encourage people to adopt rather than reproduce, especially if they're in that lower quintile of intelligence. But especially in regards to people's desires to reproduce themselves. I think we should encourage people who want to raise children but don't care if the children are their own. Those people should reproduce, and we should and people who just don't want to reproduce in the first place, those people probably should reproduce. It's kind of backwards to what the natural selection is, but that's what will create stable population.
Kind of reminds me of this one review for this guy who watched who was reviewing Idiocracy and all that, and he gave it a pretty low view, and he said, and basically he had a personal question for Mike Judge, who obviously didn't answer, but he asked, so Mike Judge, your solution to prevent humans from getting stupider is basically saying if you're poor and lower class, you can't reproduce and we have to sterilize you, but the super rich, elitists, smart elitists are allowed to breed.
Yeah, but I think it's been pretty well established that for the general range of IQ in the human population, genetics doesn't have that much to do with it. It does in the case of things like, low functioning autism has a genetic cause, things like that. But for the most part, when you're just looking at the spread of intelligence in regular humans, it's not the case that, these people have a low IQ because their parents had a low IQ. It's that they had a low IQ because being more impoverished, maybe the mother wasn't able to get on prenatal vitamins, or growing up they didn't have as good nutrition.
Yeah,
that's things like that.
Absolutely.
That's what I hate about that movie.
Mostly intelligence is determined by environmental factors, but there is a genetic component, and those genetic components are going to systematically reproduce and be subject to natural selection.
But I don't think, obviously there's a genetic components because we're smarter than chimpanzees, which are our closest relative. But when you're looking at the range of of human intelligence, the genetic factors that are, the common alleles in humans don't really make that much difference in accordance to that spread, because the Flynn effect is happening way too fast for it to be any kind of selective breeding. And I was saying it pretty much has to be because of the fact that we're getting, economically more and more advanced. Like world poverty has been cut in half in the last 10 years or something like that. So I mean, we're just getting, richer and richer economies. So that, I mean, our poor people in America today, rich people 200 years ago would love to be able to live like them.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and all.
I would like to clarify my position, because it sounds like the chat had some objections. I am not. I am talking about a cultural shift where irresponsible reproduction is viewed in the same way as, say, adultery, where it's not illegal. It's not illegal, just frowned upon.
What do you mean by irresponsible reproduction?
Well, like if you know that you're not the brightest light bulb in the drawer, then you should probably look towards adoption and getting a vasectomy, right? That's the kind of that would be more responsible. I think that's the cultural attitude we should have about reproduction. That if you don't think that or if you know that you have a congenital disease that is likely to affect your children. I saw that film with Julianne Moore and Kristen Stewart about that all early onset Alzheimer's, and it's just like if I knew there are people out there who know they have something like that, where their children are very likely to suffer some horrible ailment, and yet they still choose to reproduce. And I think that as a society, that should be discouraged. Not legally. I don't want that to be a governmental policy, and I'm not advocating for any sort of aggression, just sort of a social attitude in the same way that we view adultery.
But I mean, it's like, look at my case. Look at my case. You might say, because everyone says, hey, you're a pretty smart guy, so you might say, okay, you can reproduce, and yet my son is not a very low functioning autistic, but to the point where he can't really look after himself. I mean, he can look after himself during the day, he can feed himself, take a shower, things like that, but he can't buy food. If I have food in the house, he can eat, but he can't buy food. So I mean,
but that's something that you learned after you had reproduced, and that might be a reason why you might be more hesitant to have your own children in the future. But
his sister doesn't have that problem.
And can I add something, Shane? Another thing, Fourth, that you're also ignoring is, what about those diseases like Huntington's that don't manifest until you're in your 50s and 60s, and by that point, especially if you don't know about it, you've already had kids, and your kids have probably already had kids. That's I'm not ignoring that. I'm just saying that's a complicated issue. You mentioned Huntington's. You don't find out until you're 50 or 60. Well, your kids are probably in their 20s or 30s. And if I found out that one of my parents had Huntington's, I would not choose to have my own children. I would choose to adoption. The thing is, you can test for Huntington's. I mean, just because your parents have it doesn't mean you're guaranteed to have it. You can.
Right. I'm saying if you have a significantly elevated chance of passing that defective gene onto your children, then you should definitely consider alternatives.
And
we should encourage people to.
But when they were talking earlier in the chat about like gene editing, you could do that where you read the genome of the father and the mother and like select the best genes from each and avoid the ones that are problematic.
Yeah,
if it's a case where both the father and the mother, have a bad gene for, Huntington's or whatever, well, we've got this database where we can grab a good gene from it and put it in there, and then you can still have your own kids, but they don't have these, genetic.
Shane, I was about to say, I saw something like that when I was in high school biology. We saw a video, and it was about genetic, inherited neurological diseases like that. And there was a case of a woman who she just could not have any children because every time she gave birth, the child would die would die, would die only a few years later. It found out that she had the gene for, I think it's called Tay-Sachs disease, I think. And basically, it prevents, your kid from developing properly, and it basically causes them to die within, their first couple years. But they were able to find out, you do have some genes that don't carry it, and we can take that with your husband and make it so your baby will do it. And she was able to have a baby that lived to childhood, and from what I heard, is still alive and doing well. So,
what was that? Is that a mitochondrial disease?
I am not sure.
Because I know they've done it with mitochondria, because normally you get the mitochondria from your mother. If your mother has something like that,
yeah, hang on, I'm looking it up right now.
Then they can take the mitochondria from the father and implant it into into an ovum and do it that way. And if the mother and the father both have a mitochondrial problem, they can take it from a third party, and so it's possible to have a child with 3 parents.
Basically, what Tay-Sachs is, it's a rare inherited disorder that basically it's a neurodegenerative disorder that damages the nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. And basically, from what I've read, it's basically like Huntington's disease, but instead of developing when they're 50, it develops when they're 3 to 6 months.
But I mean, where are the genes that cause? Are they nuclear DNA or mitochondrial DNA?
I'm trying to look that up right now.
Because if it's mitochondrial DNA, I think they can do that now.
It's a mutation in the hexa gene.
All right, I don't know which one that is.
The hexosaminidase subunit alpha.
Yeah, that doesn't help me.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at it. Yeah, it's a disorder of chromosome 15.
Oh, okay, so it's nuclear.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
they can figure. Well, I mean, I imagine that we're probably at the point now where they can select chromosomes. I just don't think we're at the point where they can select individual genes.
Well, that's what they did. They took a chromosome that wasn't defective, and they took an egg cell from her that didn't have the defective chromosome in it, and they mixed it with the father's DNA so it didn't develop Tay-Sachs.
Now, if we don't already have, CRISPR is an extremely powerful tool, and so
that blows my mind.
Yeah, we will be able to basically make any direct gene edit that we want in the very near future.
Yeah, it's still it's still kind of preliminary and everything. They're still getting it going, but man, the stuff they're doing is just mind blowing.
What's CRISPR? Is that like some sort of new genetic technique, or like 3D genetic printing, or?
It's an acronym, stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats. But it was this discovery in the 90s. They discovered that this bacteria, they had these weird sequences, these short palindromic repeats in their genome, and then they end up finding the cause for that was a gene that was used by bacteria to pass down this inherited immunity to viruses that infected bacteria. And they found out that they can use this gene that they called Cas9, or the protein Cas9. That protein can be given a specific sequence of DNA, and it will make its cut into the DNA at only that sequence. So you can use this technology, this protein Cas9, to make very specific gene edits at specific locations, and you can add in your own genes in an extremely more precisely controlled way. It used to be that we would use things called gene guns, where we literally wrapped genes around particles of gold and literally fired them into cells to try to get them to edit genes. It was just
or they'd use a retrovirus. They'd use a retrovirus, and it was the same thing. Either way, you were inserting it at a random point, and you couldn't control where. And most of the genome is junk, so it was usually okay. But if it happens to split a gene in two, then you could actually cause a genetic issue doing it that way. But I'm thinking of like the J. Craig Ventnor lab, what I think they've been able to do this with very simple bacteria, is have the genome information in the computer and just print out the DNA and put it inside a cell. That's
Right,
that's
yeah,
not
they
what I
can,
think
they
about
can
in the more
you
distant
can
future.
make custom that's not too advanced that you can make your own custom sequence of DNA. I mean, but
Yeah,
yeah,
but 50
getting
years
that
from now, who
DNA.
knows?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm talking relative to CRISPR, but yeah, being able to take that DNA and stick it wherever. You could write your own genes. You can do whatever you want now.
Yeah, you just print out the entire genome and just stick it into a cell, and there it goes.
Yeah, Shane, also, this is just a little thing, but I was talking to some people about microbiology one time, and they said, it's probably the most, granted, we hear it a lot, but it's technically not true, is when we hear people, like when we're talking about viruses, and people talk about viruses mutating, and this one guy said, well, the reason why that's a little confusing is because technically the viruses themselves don't mutate, because viruses aren't alive, rather the enzyme they're coded in, that's what mutates and evolves.
Well, no,
Well, no,
viruses
they're
can mutate
genetic
because
sequence
viruses have,
mutates.
yeah, viruses have genes, and genes can mutate.
Viruses just aren't alive because they don't metabolize anything. They're just a bunch of proteins wrapped around some DNA, and those proteins help get the DNA into a cell, which does the stuff for it.
The funny thing about viruses is that a lot of scientists, they still don't know where viruses came from because of that sole purpose,
Well, they apparently they've been there from the very beginning, because when they discovered archaea, they said, wow, this is so different that it's not even closely related to bacteria. So you're talking about a deviation that happened, way, way, way early on. And there are viruses that can only infect archaea. And they're saying that, yeah, viruses have just been with us since day one. Since the first life forms evolved, there have been viruses.
Probably evolved right alongside the hypercycles that emerged in those volcanic vents on the ocean floor.
Well, yeah, because if you have protocells, and the protocells, learn how to live and become more of a life form, you have other protocells that just are able to go inside one of the others and act more like a virus. There you go, and that's the deal from the very beginning.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of weird and all that. There was actually this one medical drama I was watching one time, and there was this rare case where this person, caught this one disease, and he was really, and he wasn't responding very well to the treatment, and one scientist found a way to prolong his life, and it was a little bit weird and all that, and it had a lot of people confused, but it kind of made sense when you think about it, was that he put him on a weak immunosuppressant, and people were like, why are they putting him on immunosuppressants? Won't that make him worse? Well, it didn't cure him, it was just to prolong his life, but the scientist point in the drama explained the reason why he's suffering is because, for whatever reason, his immune system's going haywire and it's being too aggressive. So until we can figure out how to properly treat him, we need to give him just a mild immunosuppressant so his immune system doesn't accidentally destroy his body in the process, because that's actually what kills a lot of people with infections, especially respiratory infections, is when your immune system basically goes into overload, basically.
Yeah, that's a symptom of sepsis.
What's interesting is the idea that the reason why there are so many deadly diseases is because we have an immune system. If we didn't have an immune system, then all these viruses and bacteria wouldn't have to attack us in order to survive and live inside us. They don't want to kill us. They want, I'm personifying, of course, and a lot of people hate that, but they want us, up and running around and breathing and everything so they can spread themselves. It's actually to their detriment to try and kill us. The only reason why they try and kill us is because our immune system is fighting them, and it's been kind of this evolutionary arms race over billions of years.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, if I recall correctly, the irony is that quite a few viruses that make us sick, if they were left on their own, they actually wouldn't do a whole lot of damage, in the long, unless they were in you for decades and years. And there are cases of people, I mean, that have been discovered that they have a mild viral or bacterial infection that never healed properly, but yet they were able to live normal lives. And the reason, like you said, why we get so seriously sick is just because our immune system sometimes goes a little overboard when they fight the infection.
Well, and it's also because the reason why they're creating all these toxins is to try and kill the immune cells that are trying to kill them. And if it weren't for them, they would have no need to create those toxins and use up energy making toxins, and they could just do their own thing and live inside us.
Yeah,
Well, you actually have more cells that are not human within your body than you do have human cells.
Oh yeah, and their collective the number of unique genes they have outnumbers ours.
Yeah, that's actually why I've actually read this, is that contrary to what some people think, the most common form of death among people with, immune compromised systems like HIV, it's not, they caught a cold and it developed into pneumonia. It's actually they died from a rare form of cancer, because that's really what our immune system is mostly designed to fight for, is cancer cells.
Yeah, basically everything turns into cancer given enough time.
Yeah, like
that, they say that's the real problem with human longevity, because you can, cure all of the diseases, and you can even, try and, restore telomeres to prevent aging, but eventually everything's still going to turn into cancer, and you'll be a big lump. You'll be I'm 500 years old, but I'm a 500-year-old lump of cancer.
Yeah, that's actually true. That's why I actually read somewhere like that. A person said, scientifically speaking, a real life vampire that's lived for thousands of years, he wouldn't be like this handsome, Transylvania, feudalistic count. He would be this giant blob of mass, because his cells, would eventually become more and more defective, and basically he would just be 100% cancer, but he doesn't die from it because of the vampire curse.
Well, there are only so many different ways that cancer, or there are only so many different forms of cancer, because we have a limited genome. There's a lot of them, but perhaps in the future, we'll figure out basically every different way that cancer can manifest and figure out some optimal treatment for that.
Yep. Yeah, well, it's mostly because, our cells are designed to reproduce a certain number of times and then die off. And basically, cancer cells are cells that have forgotten how to die. And so they just make more and more and more copies of themselves. And since it's damaged DNA that's causing them to do that, then the cells they're creating have the same damage to their DNA. And so they keep doing
that. And actually, Shane, going back to this, that's actually why a lot of health experts often say the best way to keep your kids from not getting as sick as possible is, you gotta get them vaccinated and, let them be kids, let them, roll around in dirt and all that, because that's how you build that. That's how you build that immunity. Again, I'm personifying. That's how you train your immune system to know the difference, like, okay, this bacterium virus, it's dangerous. We got to watch out for it. This one, keep an eye on it, but don't, overreact. And this one, oh yeah, that's harmless. You can just ignore it.
Well, if you don't do that, if you make this big...
a certain logic to that. I mean, certainly it helps a kid not develop allergies if they're exposed to a lot of stuff.
Or autoimmune disorders. A lot of autoimmune disorders are caused by being in a sterile environment.
But you don't want. But the other extreme of that is kids or people who want to infect their kids with rubella, or
You don't want them to get the Ebola virus, but you want them to get the normal viruses and bacteria that are just in the environment around them.
Well, yeah, that's the whole point. That's actually where the myth comes from. The myth is that, oh, well, if they get exposed to, chicken pox and all that, they'll be stronger if they survive, because, isn't that what causes asthma? No, what prevents asthma is environmental germs. It's the viruses and bacteria that are naturally in the environment, and some of them cause harm, some of them don't,
Yeah, basically what they're saying is, I want my child to get chicken pox, so he'll be immune to chicken pox and not get chicken pox. It's like, what?
Yeah. And you want to something, Shane, contrary to what, to what a lot of TV shows, including that one Rugrats episode says, well, you want them to get them when they're young, because if they get it when they're old, it'll become shingles and they'll die. Actually,
well, to be fair, I think that episode came out before the vaccine became available, and it was true that children it was much better to contract chickenpox as a child than as an adult. But since the development of the vaccine, it's a no-brainer. Just give them the vaccine.
Because I had chickenpox when I was 5, and they say that now that I've turned 50, I'm I'm at risk for shingles, so I'm on the waiting list to get the shingles vaccine.
I was about to say that, Shane. That's the thing, is that contrary to popular belief, shingles isn't what happens, when you get the chickenpox, when you're older. What actually causes it is when the chickenpox virus within your body, because people fail to realize this, chickenpox is a form of herpes.
Well, it's a resurgence of it.
Yeah, it's when it resurges. It's when it reactivates itself.
But I mean, if you never had it before and you never had the vaccine and you get it when you're 50, it's probably going to turn into shingles.
Yeah, but still, that's the point is, I mean. And also, I think another problem with a lot of cartoons, and the reason why a lot of people are a little hesitant with the chickenpox and that myth, is because of how popular culture portrays chickenpox. They portray it as, they often portray the person as, being able to, walk around and talk and do stuff. They're just really, really itchy. But according to a lot of people who remember when they had chickenpox, they're like, yeah, that is not chickenpox. You are in extreme amounts of pain. You are not itchy. You are instead burning,
Well, it varies from person to person. I had chickenpox probably when I was 1 or 2 years old, and there's pictures of me, and I looked bad. It got me really bad. But there's pictures of me smiling with chickenpox. So
yeah, well, it's like my mother. This was before the vaccine. She got not only chickenpox, but she got mumps and measles, and I mean, she's a perfectly healthy 80-year-old woman now. She's just active. I want to be that active when I'm 80, and she's just healthy as a horse. But I mean, she knows, people she went to school with who got mumps or measles and, became blind for life or deaf for life or,
I think as the old saying goes, like you said, a lot of, the anti-vaxxers say, oh yeah, well, my grandpa got double pneumonia, influenza, and diphtheria, and yet he recovered and he went on to live, to a healthy old age of 90.
Because the ones who died didn't get to be anyone's grandpa.
Yeah,
right.
That's the thing. You're looking at the hits, but you're forgetting the misses. You're looking at, the people who contracted, double pneumonia, influenza, and diphtheria and survived, but you don't see the people who didn't make it, or they survived, but they had permanent, health problems because of it.
Well, but
yeah, I mean, look at influenza. I mean, everybody gets influenza like a dozen times in their life, and 99.9% of them are fine. But one case in about 30,000 or something.
Most of the time, that's not technically influenza. They have the same set of symptoms, and they think they have influenza. But I mean, unless you are laid out and miserable for a week, you didn't have influenza. My nephew was always very athletic and healthy and everything, and he got H1N1, and they actually verified that, yeah, it was H1N1. He laid out for a week. Yeah, I mean, after it was done, it was over. He says, I'm getting my flu vaccine every year.
Yeah.
He actually felt bad enough to go to the doctor. I remember during the big H1N1 scare, the Amazing Atheist said that he went to the doctor and was actually officially diagnosed with H1N1, but he thought it was just like a cold to him. So it probably depends on how robust your immune system is at the time.
Well, my guess would be like years earlier, he got it and was really laid out with it, but his immune system remembers enough of it to give him some kind of protection against the newer version, the way it's mutated.
Yeah,
because the immunity isn't an on-off kind of thing. There's different levels of it.
Exactly, especially for something like the flu, which is constantly mutating. And then, how up to date is your immune system? Is it 1 year, one flu season out of date? Is it 6 months? Is it 5 years? The amount of time that it's been since.
Well, I'm the only one in this house who gets the flu vaccine every year.
I get it every day because of my job, and I let you, and I can confirm it probably saved my butt this year, because a couple of months ago there was an outbreak of it wasn't H1N1, it was a different, I think it was a different strain of the flu, but it's a very common one, and it was just going all over, Northeast Wisconsin, and several of my co-workers were calling in, and one of them came back.
H5 went through here.
Yeah, H5, I think that's what it was. It was the H5 virus, and they came back, and they were and they all had all the telltale signs of the flu. They had of recovering. They had the really bright red nose, the kind of flushed face, and granted, it was a weaker strain because for them it only lasted a couple days instead of the normal week. But they said, "Oh my God, those were the most miserable 3 days I went through. I couldn't get out of bed. My throat hurt. My nose hurt. Everything was hurting."
Yeah, it was like everyone else in this house was just laid out for a week because it was going around my wife's work. It was going around the kids' school. I was the only one who was vaccinated, and I was the only one who didn't get sick. And I'm like, okay, I'm liking the flu vaccine right now.
Well,
it's a real tragedy that our society is just going, what you gonna do? You got the flu. You still got to work, But no. If we had the dramatic shift. If we had a dramatic shift in the way that we thought about the flu, like if you suspect you have the flu, stay home from work. And if everybody did that, the flu would go away.
Oh yeah. That's actually something that people told. That's actually something I also read. Apart from vaccinations, the number one way to prevent yourself from getting, from getting sick is wash your hands, before you eat or touch your face. And, again, like you said, if you don't feel so well, call in sick. That's the reason why people get sick in the first place. It's because, we have people.
The vaccine only covers 4 strains, and there's hundreds of strains.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we get sick and why we get those seasonal outbreaks. It's that one idiot, that wakes up. He's like, "Oh, I've got a fever of 103. My stomach hurts. I can't breathe through my nose, and I've got the runs. I'll tough it out. I'll go to work anyway."
Yeah, but people think like they're just thinking about themselves. They're thinking, I'm gonna tough it out. Like I'm not so much of a weakling that I can't just work through this. It's like, well, maybe it's not hitting you very hard, but what about all those people you spread it to, and then the people they spread it to? And if we took a really extremely paranoid, where it's like quarantine everybody who thinks they've got the flu, maybe we could actually eradicate the flu. We wouldn't even necessarily need vaccines. Everybody should get their vaccine.
Well, it's kind of like what I was saying earlier. How are you going to convince everyone to do it? I mean, we could eliminate lice forever if we got every single person on the planet to shave their head on the same day, and then lice would become extinct. So theoretically, that's good, but how are you going to do it?
That's the problem.
Well, even if you only got 99% of the people to do it, then that might actually work.
Well, I don't know. One person left with lice, it'll end up getting back through the population.
I was about to say this. It kind of reminds me of this debate I was having with a person, and they're all about, you're libertarians and all that, right? So you don't believe in the non-aggression principle. Well, what if there's like a really nasty flu going around, and everyone's advising that, if they're, and the vaccine, doesn't cover this strain, and everyone's advising you wash your hands and all that. Well, what about that one person that says, "I don't care, I'm going to go around, I'm going to still go out, I don't care if I'm sick." Well, how would libertarians deal with that? And I responded, well, if they know they are sick, they know they are contagious, but they decide to go anywhere, then, they are violating the non-aggression principle. So you have the right as an individual to say, "Hey, you stay away from my property. I don't want you here because you're sick." That's how libertarians would handle something like that,
Yeah.
Well,
how would you find out?
You could even make the argument that, just going out in public knowing you're sick could be a valid crime. Might be a valid law, depending on the severity.
And some African nations, that's literally what they do, especially with Ebola. Like some of the militias, like they've actually said, they've actually been trained to recognize the systems. And if they see a person with Ebola trying to leave the quarantine zone, they just shoot the person right on the spot, and they just burn the body. They don't move it. They just shoot them, then carefully douse a little bit of gasoline from a distance, then throw it over, and they do it. They take that very strictly. Now, I don't support that, but from where they grew up, and you can kind of understand why they do that, because that's their only method of containing this infection,
Yeah, I think you're going to convince a lot more people through like just logical argument than you are going to convince people by force. I mean, that's
that's the thing. If there is
because that technique only works if the militia is armed, but no one else is. If you've got an armed population, you've got.
The point is that the policy, whichever policy you have, is arguably consistent with the non-aggression principle.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing. I've actually heard from actual, CDC experts, contrary to what you see in TV shows like Outbreak and all that, the idea that all this contagious, deadly disease broke out, we got to isolate the entire town and put everyone in that town in an isolation suit. They've actually flat out said, not only does that not work, it would actually hinder the ability to combat it because, we'd be spending all these resources trying to do that, that if one person slips out, and he sneezes on another guy, there could be another infection popping up, but we won't catch it in time because we're too focused on, on this town,
We got the Bloody Bush Dimension says, I think arresting / finding anti-vaxxers is the wrong way to go about it. I think it's better to just socially shame people from not vaccinating your kids. This is actually one of the issues where I would disagree. I actually think that whether you have some sort of government funding, and the reason I believe this is because the government-funded program of eradicating smallpox is like flat out absolutely the most cost-effective way the government has ever saved people. It was like on the order of $1 per life that they saved for that program. So I think that I think flu vaccine should be made. You should be encouraged monetarily to get it, and I think it is justifiable to say that can be done through taxes.
The problem is that, and the government has done this, is that they've actually used forceful vaccine programs to do some very unethical experiments. Like, for instance, in the Middle East, they were giving, all these people, whooping cough vaccines, but they were also injecting them with, chemicals to try to determine if they were genetically related to various terrorists so they could track them down and try to find more information. And when that got leaked to the public, everyone stopped vaccinating their kids and all those deadly diseases came back.
Yeah,
the problem wasn't funding the vaccines.
We would very
it was
likely
the abuse there.
We would very likely have polio eradicated by now if that hadn't happened, because the only two countries where it's still endemic really is Pakistan and Afghanistan. I mean, you've got a couple little things popping up like in Nigeria or places like that, but when they've looked at it, it's ended up being the vaccine type and not the wild type. The only time the wild type is showing up is those same two countries where they were trying to do that program to try to get Osama bin Laden, and that made them go, oh, whoa, no, we don't want these vaccines because that's because they do crap like that.
Not to mention smallpox. Not to mention, and actually, I've heard some controversy about the reason why the government smallpox eradication was bad is because, it got rid of wild smallpox, but we still have smallpox within government agencies, and despite even the creator of the smallpox vaccine lobbying for their destruction, the government keeps insisting, oh no, we're not going to destroy it. And they claim it's so they can create a vaccine just in case if smallpox miraculously appears in the wild again. But a lot of people have rightfully assumed, and I personally agree with it, the only reason they're keeping it is because they still are hanging on to the idea that maybe we can weaponize smallpox. And
I mean, if smallpox came back and we didn't have a vaccine, we could easily develop a new vaccine.
Yeah, that's the only reason they're keeping it. They want to keep it mutating so they can potentially weaponize it or use for personal gain, and that's the problem when the government gets involved. The government has an incentive. Yeah, they have an incentive to vaccine people, but they're also probably going to take samples of that disease so they can use it for personal gain, which is why
it's like this started talking about anti-vaxxers not vaccinating their kids. I mean, I'm on record as saying that if you're not vaccinating your kids, then it's pretty much child abuse.
Yeah,
but I think I would stop short of having the government run in, bust through the door, force the kid down and inject them. Because if you do that, what else can you allow the government to do?
Okay, here's something Sheepus said. He said, I've reacted very badly to flu vaccines in the past, but I'm still supportive of vaccines. Well, yeah, that's actually, you still benefit from vaccines because if you're one of those people where you have either a severe allergic reaction or you're immunocompromised, you still benefit because of herd immunity.
Yeah, if everyone around you is vaccinated, then you're good.
If that happened every single time you got a vaccine, then you could argue, that the vaccine's a bad thing. But that's just a rare bad reaction that happens. And but it's totally worth the risk when everybody's doing that. Yeah, some people might have a bad reaction like that, but it's way better
I mean,
than all those people getting the.
But I mean, you don't want to lose the use of your arm for 3 months every single year. So I mean, you say, okay, I'm not going to get the flu vaccine.
We don't. Well,
but
then again,
I want to make sure. I want to make sure the people I live around and work around have had the flu vaccine because I don't want to get it.
Oh yeah, there was actually, I was watching this video and it was called cringy anti-vaccine parents, and this one doctor said there was this one person that said, look, even if even if you don't, want your kid vaccinated, think about the other kids that can't get vaccinated. There's a there's a woman I know, whose child, is recovering from leukemia, and I mean, he's in remission, but his immune system's weak, from the treatment. So if he gets the flu, he has a very high risk of dying. And the mother's response was, well, how's that my problem then?
But I like
there's an interesting comment.
Hang on, just
yeah,
one second,
go
go
for it, and then I'll go.
I like the celebrities who have a baby and come out and say, if you're not vaccinated, we're not letting you anywhere near our baby. If you want to see our baby and hold our baby, you got to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
The Bloody Bush Dimension says, I just think it's better to let people do what they think is right. And when too many people are being infected, I think people will work it out themselves without the state.
You cut off there, Fourth.
He said,
we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. What people think is right is not always right, and sometimes it's incredibly wrong.
But government agents are not immune to that, and government agents are the ones that have the perceived legitimacy to initiate force against people.
That is true, and so we have to be very careful about that aspect of it. But sometimes you have to enforce a law against people doing what they think is right because what they're actually doing is very wrong. For example, people intentionally infecting their children with measles.
Oh yeah, that's definitely child abuse.
Right,
yeah.
Well, that's child abuse, but that parent is doing what they think is right. And then the other thing about too many, let's only take care of this when too many people are getting infected. Well, I think that we should strategize to completely eradicate the diseases. Smallpox had been almost completely eradicated by the 1950s, but there was this big push in the 70s just to stomp out those last remnants of it, and that push ended up saving millions of people, because once you completely eradicate it, then it's gone for the entire future of humanity. So you don't just take action when it gets too bad. No, I think you take action most aggressively when you're almost there.
Yeah, but why does the government need to do it? I mean, if I recall correctly, the Red Cross, which is largely an independent organization, played a big role in distributing vaccines. Why does the government necessarily have to be the vaccine distributors? Well,
that's certainly
if a private organization has an incentive to distribute vaccines, they'll do it. Well,
and they don't always have the incentive, and it's because the people who benefit from a vaccine aren't the people who get the vaccine. It's all the future, especially when you're eradicating a disease, it's all the future generations of humanity. So that's not necessarily economically profitable to distribute a vaccine at the aggressive rates that the free market would establish. Right, because as the infection rate approaches zero, then there really isn't that demand for the vaccine. So so this is a case in economics where it might actually be worth it to humanity as a whole if you actually artificially increase that demand and that supply for that vaccine, so that future generations will benefit from it, as they did with smallpox. And that would not have happened without, I don't think that would have happened without government intervention targeting smallpox specifically.
Ludbard Mengbaverk, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, says it is a good point. I think many workplace owners wouldn't want diseases that affect their workers in their own workplace, and they'd probably ask their employees not to come in because it's unproductive. That's exactly what Disney did following that one measles outbreak at Disneyland, or I think it was Disneyland. They started having a policy where, okay, if you want to work here, you need to be vaccinated. And if you've got the symptoms, if you got this list of symptoms, you stay home.
Yeah. I just wish
Yeah,
more stores
and
would do it.
the problem is that employers sometimes just don't have that policy. When I was working at Office Depot as a cashier, and I was handling people's money, and they wanted me to come in and work even when I was sick, and I was outraged. I was all like, "That's unethical. You can't don't."
Yeah, I mean, it's one
give
thing
me
if
the
you're, it's one
incentive
thing
to
if you're
come in and
back.
spread this disease to people, but they did, because the economic gain for having me working there at the counter, because they're not the ones who suffer their business, because they, when somebody contracts the flu, because I handed them change and I had the flu, well, they can't prove that it was Office Depot. They probably won't even they suspect that it was Office Depot. So there wasn't really any downside to having me stay home there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if you're like working in an office where you can close the door and you're not really interacting with people, but if you're taking money and handing change and handing their products back to them, and especially if you're working around food.
Oh yeah, that happens. That, like I said, that happens. Unfortunately, that happens in my store all the time. I mean, I've seen people who literally are coming down with illnesses that basically, not to get too TMI, basically to make it sound less gross, basically they can't keep anything down, and if they do get something down, it immediately comes out the other end, and they're still told, by the higher ups, I don't care, you need to come into work anyway.
Yeah, my wife will tell people, especially if they're working at the deli, it's like, go home. You've got sniffles, you're a little warm, go home. And she's not the manager. She can send people home and she can kind of do stuff like that, but she has to answer to management. But she will answer like, look, they're sick. I'm not getting sick.
Yeah.
I'm not getting my coworkers sick. I'm not getting our customers sick.
Then again, I think the problem with that, and I largely blame this on the government, because they basically, because of corporatism, they rig the system that way. The reason why we see stuff like that happening is because nowadays a lot of businesses are being encouraged to be run from the top down instead of the bottom up. And my general manager, he understands that and he knows that. But the problem is that the upper managers have more power in the say. So they're basically, not to insult them or anything, but they basically lost their fight. They don't, argue back with the manager. And I mean, the thing is, me and my general manager, we talk all the time and we agree. Some of our higher ups, at the company I work at, they are stuck in the past and they're actually implementing very counterproductive policies. And one of the reasons is because they're not running things from the bottom up, But again, I think that goes back to government, because government, with all these rules and regulations, they created a system where if you don't run from the top down, you're going to go out of business because some other guy is just going to get the government to pass another law. So that's why we need to return to a free market, because in a free market, there'd be a much greater incentive, to send sick employees home, because if employees, get sick, there's, and they get other people sick, especially in a smaller, more competitive market. I mean, if everyone gets sick, well, that's, a day you can't be in business. But with a big corporation that's protected by government rules and regulation, they have no incentive to do that, because they're like, oh, well, we're covered anyway, so why bother?
Yeah, I think it goes to something similar to what Fourth Root said earlier. We need a change in the culture, so that if you have the symptoms, then you call in sick and you stay home. And employers, if you notice these symptoms, send the people home. It's 10 o'clock, so we got to get some final thoughts in. So anyone got anything to say quickly?
There was a couple of brain teasers that I wanted to share. Yeah. So the first one I call the 3 of a kind problem, and basically it's like you're playing a hand of poker. It's not like a normal poker game where you get information based on whether your opponent discards or draws cards. No, it's just deal out 5 cards to your opponent, deal out 5 cards to yourself. Okay, one opponent. You look at your cards. You have a 3 of a kind. That's all you know. You have a 3 of a kind. What is the best 3 of a kind to have? And I'm not counting 4 of a kinds or full houses because those aren't 3 of a kinds. It's a 3 of a kind. What are all 5 of those cards? Their suit and their rank.
Well, I imagine you would want enough of a spread to minimize the possibility of your opponent having it, because a straight beats 3 of a kind, doesn't it?
Right. So there's that generally is the strategy that you want to go for. That's the first stepping stone you have to realize. So obviously ace, 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 king, queen isn't the best because it doesn't block as many straights. But then figuring out exactly which cards are optimal, that's the real trick. Especially which suits, which cards,
Yeah, because you want to avoid
flushes
too. You want to avoid flushes too. So
right.
You want to. Yeah.
Now, obviously, there are at least 4 variations of the hand, for each suit combination. But there are exactly 4 hands. Exactly 4 hands that this applies to. And then the other brain teaser that I thought of was, what is the smallest number whose sum of its factors is greater than itself, and that number is odd? What is the smallest odd number? What is the smallest odd number whose factors sum to a number greater than itself?
Smallest odd number whose factors sum.
That's simple. The answer is the Backstreet Boys.
I'm gonna say it's 1 because its factors are 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, and it's infinity.
Well, you can't count itself as its
I think none of you guys.
I know I was cheating. I know I was cheating.
I know. I think none of you guys got that reference that I just made. It's from an old TV show, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, where they're trying to beat this guy called Wayne the Brain, and during like a bar trivia question, and finally this one guy asks this really, really long, complicated, mathematical question, and despite all their thinking, they can't do it, and finally they decide to quit. But afterwards, they talk to the guy who beat them, and they ask him, "I just need to know one thing. You got it right? What was the answer to that mathematical question?" And the guy was like, "That's easy. Everyone knows the answer to that math equation is the Backstreet Boys."
That's fun. Yeah. Well, anyways, we don't have time to go through these riddles, but I just thought I'd leave you with them.
What is the answer for that last one, though?
945.
Wow.
Okay.
I never would have gotten that.
Okay. I'll go then.
I would have given up and gone on to something else by that point. All right, Nicholas, you got anything you want to say before we drop off?
No, I just wanted to thank you for inviting the supporters, and I really appreciate your work, and I'm glad to be a supporter.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm really glad for my supporters and my co-hosts and everyone else who encourages me, and everyone who views, of course, and everyone who chats. And we didn't get any super chats tonight, but I still love all the chat rooms. There were some interesting discussions going on in there. So thanks so much. We're about 6 minutes over, so I gotta cut off quickly. So I'll just say, as usual, stay strong and be free.